Hi, everybody. Very exciting to be here. My name is Nancy Farese. I'm the founder and executive director of Catchlight. And I just want to walk through quickly what we're going to do here in the next hour. We're going to go through introductions, and then we're going to actually be able to hear from each one of our photographers. You're going to see some of their Catchlight project. They'll each do 7-minute presentations, so you get a taste of what they're doing. We've got lots more follow-up and more depth in each of these projects back in our containers. Then after that, we'll do a little bit of sort of 8 to 10 minutes of question up here on the dais, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So be thinking of your questions. We would love to prioritize students if there are students who have a specific question. So if you're a student, get up and jump around, raise your arms. So just a little bit about Catchlight. We founded Catchlight around the idea of the power of storytelling to connect us and bind us, and around the demonstrated power of images to raise awareness about social issues. I know those are values that everyone in this room shares. That's why we're here. That's what UPI pulls us together here at Photoville to celebrate. We get to find our tribe of people, right? But I also think that we as Americans today, and maybe particularly in this room, are sharing some other concerns. We're sharing a sense of despair about what's going on in our world today, the division and the bias and the reductive thinking that we are all sort of caught up in the swirls of our media and our technology. I think we probably also share a strong sense of hope. I think it's extraordinarily exciting time because we've got amazing new tools that can help us connect across geographies and across language. And also we have an amazing opportunity to recognize diversity of storytelling. And we know the power, the critical asset that diversity is in virtually every aspect of our lives as Americans, and I would say, certainly in our craft. So it's an amazing time to be here and working in these areas. And the urgency, though, of the moment is also just a very critical value that we share. So Catchlight is a San Francisco-based nonprofit, and our mission is to accelerate the social impact of visual storytelling. And we do that by primarily through our program that's a fellowship program. That's what we're here celebrating today. Our fellowship program recognizes photographers through a global search based on 3 critical criteria. We are looking for people who are remarkable artists, people who share a moral courage and a moral imagination to take on really, really hard subjects in a candid and an innovative way. And then we're looking for leadership. We're looking for people who we can surround with a basket of resources and encourage and nurture their work to go beyond, from being special to being really significant, and they themselves to become significant thought leaders in the field of how we can continue to push the boundaries of art as it's applied to social purpose. We are a small organization. We do not do this by ourselves at all, and we're so fortunate to be partnered with some significant media partners. Each one of our fellows this year was partnered with the Pulitzer Center for Tomas's work, the Marshall Project for Brian's work, and Sarah was partnered with the Center for Investigative Reporting. We also work with other remarkable partnerships as well, which help us to develop personal impact in our fellows as well as professional impact. The UPI being a major one for our exhibitions, digital silver printing, did all of our printing here, which we're really excited about. Anastasia Gallery, I'm just going to put a plug in for them. We had a wonderful event at their place last night, and if you care about arts and social impact, definitely check that out while you're here. It's over in Soho. And then ICP is a really valuable education partner for us. So all of these partners gather around, hold hands, nurture our photographers with the goal of helping them amplify their work and develop themselves both personally and professionally to go forward and show us the way about where the industry's going. So quickly, I am going to introduce our fellows, and then we're going to do a little video. So I'd like to introduce you first of all to Tomas Van Houtryve, who's right here next to me. He did an amazing project for us on the U.S.-Mexico border wall. Brian Frank, who is from California, who did a very exciting project that we'll be looking at on the criminal justice system and programs around that to keep kids out of prison. And then Sarah Blesener did an amazing project for us on youth development and youth culture. And we're going to watch a little video here. Social change happens via well-told storytelling. At Catchlight, we're trying to solve this giant mismatch between creative talent and social impact.
Photography can really change how we see other people.
It's a way to enter people's lives and let them speak for themselves.
It doesn't matter what language you speak. You can be from completely different cultures and see an image and feel something.
Catchlight is geared towards amplifying and creating community around extraordinary storytellers. This is the inaugural year of our fellowship. We selected 3 fellows and we gave them each $30,000 to build on work that was already in process.
I photograph mostly youth and youth culture. I try to focus on how youth are interacting with politics and how political issues are affecting youth culture. Last year I went to Russia for a whole year to work on a project about patriotic education. And I realized the rhetoric that I saw in Russia was quite similar to what's happening here in my own country. The amount of time I've had to work on this project wouldn't have happened without Catchlight. I never thought I'd have that opportunity as a photographer to really dig into one topic and give it 100%.
I always say if you want to look at racial relations in this country, go to a jail. Most of the people locked up are black and brown. Most of the jailers are not. It's not that more brown people are committing crimes, it's the way that brown communities are being policed. And that broader racial dynamic is the thing that really interests me. I had my own run-ins with the law. A lot of the people that I'm photographing now, I see myself in them and I'm like, damn, you didn't get out and I did. The Catchlight, they've been the bridge with who I need to know to make this work possible.
Catchlight has allowed me to slow down, to dig deep on a single subject rather than hopping from one news story to another one. This project is about the Mexican border, how it is today and how it was back in the 19th century. During the Mexican ruled period of the Southwest, what would it have looked like? What would the people's faces look like, and what would have the border area look like? I'm using 19th century wet plate photography to think about our past. On the other hand, the border where it is today is a huge array of cameras and sensors that alert Border Patrol when people are crossing. I'll be using the latest surveillance imaging technology to show that when photography is weaponized, it turns people into statistics and targets rather than individuals.
We have understood how to connect art in these powerful social stories with measurable social impact.
Each fellow is partnered with a media organization. Normally I'm working completely alone, and by being partnered with someone like the Center for Investigative Reporting, I can have someone fact-checking and researching and helping me throughout the journey.
Through the Pulitzer Center, there's a whole number of actors that are starting to assemble around this work to bring it into educational institutions, bring it into museums.
Catchlight connecting with people that know how to talk to people in power. The Marshall Project is bringing a lot of firepower with them to publish this work.
We're building community in several different ways. One is with the fellowship, but then secondly, using the power of social media platforms. Everyday Bay Area is part of our effort to go deep into our local community. We partnered with Everyday Africa and KQED Public Media and created a cohort of 18 local photographers directed towards the idea of what is the new California dream. Part of it is simply an effort to understand who it is in our community and what this world looks like to them.
The people at Catchlight get that long-term support is the most effective way to bring these projects to the widest audience.
The finish line is just sharing and sharing a lot.
I really want to create photography that everyone can relate to.
There's never been a more important time to understand how to use the power of visual storytelling to make social impact in the world. So that gives you a sense of the work that we're doing, and I'll just say now that we've finished the first year of our fellowship, the Catchlight projects have been the subject of more than 30 different publications, viewed by 60 million people, awarded 7 awards, and inspired 3,500 students in classrooms across the U.S. So we're really excited about what has happened this first year with our Catchlight Fellows, and deeply honored to have this group here of remarkable leaders. So I'm going to turn it over to Tomas to tell you about his project.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everybody. Okay, so I just wanted to explain to you a little bit how I got to doing this project, because before I'd done this, I had never used old photographic techniques before. You saw a little bit in the video, I was pouring collodion, old chemicals, onto glass plates. Well, basically, I grew up in California, and this is a map of what California and the rest of the United States would have looked like in 1839, the year that photography was invented. So if you could get a camera from Paris, where the first daguerreotype was taken, and run to California and the western states, Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, this is what you would have encountered. And I thought maybe some people had did that. Early days of photography were their pictures of the West before the United States conquered this area. And I spoke to a lot of historians, I read a lot of books, and it appears that there is no photographic record of the United States, of the West before the United States took over. So how did the border jump from up there, from where it is today? How did we end up in that situation? And what would it have looked like back then? So since I couldn't find the pictures, I decided I would go out and sort of try to take them after the fact. So I learned these 19th century photographic techniques. I found an old wooden camera in Paris, learned how to do glass negative wet plate collodion, and then I followed this line that you see on the map. So starting at the Pacific coast, what's today the border between the state of Oregon and California, going all the way into Wyoming. So part of Wyoming was part of Mexico in the past, down through Colorado, all the way down to Texas, and then to the Louisiana-Texas border. So at that time, right, pre-1848, Mexico was twice as big, and the United States was a third smaller. So what was that period look like? What did the people look like? What did that old border look like? Those were the questions I had. So what I ended up doing is sort of pairing these diptychs of portraits that I took with landscapes along that original border. The portrait subjects are people that I found that have lived in the West since before it was the United States. So families that have been there since before 1848, Mexican families or indigenous families and their direct descendants. And having grown up in California and gone through the entire California school system, this was completely unknown to me. The way they teach school kids in California about early history is as if it started in 1849 with the gold rush, and like the football teams are named after 49. Everything is 1849. That's like year zero. It's as if it was a blank slate before that, and all of a sudden so-called pioneers came and settled and found gold and did all these things? Well, there was a thriving society. Slavery had been abolished 40 years before the United States. The last Mexican governor of California was black when there was, the black population of the United States in the South was in slavery. Indigenous people were given voting rights under the Mexican government. Indigenous people in the United States didn't finally all get voting rights until after 1948, right? So 100 years later. So I learned all this during the process. Another thing that I learned, the woman on the left, she has Jewish roots, she found out, and there's many people living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, who got there because their families fled the Spanish Inquisition into the New World in the 16th and 17th century. So I learned all about these people, the original identities of the West, and the ones that you don't see that are featured in pop culture, in Western movies, in Marlboro ads, or the way that photography has treated the West. It's basically the photography has treated the West, seeing guys in cowboy hats, rather than the people that lived there before U.S. conquest. So just a number of people that I got along the border and the border itself. This is the left side is the canal, which is today between California and Oregon. And the girl on the right is a descendant of the families that founded the city of San Francisco in an expedition that went there in 1775 before the United States was independent. Another thing that I learned during this process is just how we tell the story of ourselves. The identity of the United States is extremely English-centric and extremely East Coast-centric. We talk about the Pilgrims. Everybody knows about Plymouth Rock, the Pilgrims, the Mayflowers, every kid in the United States. But do you know that Coronado came from southern Mexico and mapped out the Grand Canyon 80 years before the Pilgrims even set foot in what's today the United States? So the story is sort of told backwards, as if the East was explored by Europeans before the West, when it's the other way around. I'm going to go through a little bit fast because there's a second part of the story that I did, and that is looking at how photography is used today along the border. Before Trump started talking about the wall, you have the previous two U.S. administrations that were investing tons of money in national security to reinforce the wall. And what they decided to do is use surveillance technologies. They call it the virtual fence, right? So this is using aerial drones, predator drones, surveillance towers and things like that to detect people when they cross. And I felt like that was kind of a buried story, that billions of dollars had been put into this. And so I wanted to see, actually when I pulled back and looked at it, it looked like the US government, what was its biggest photos project of all time in terms of money? It might have been setting up cameras along the southern border. So what does the world look like from that point of view? So these are photos that I took in January using a drone, flying from Mexico exactly along the US-Mexico border to get that perspective. And this is a photo of Trump's prototype walls on the top, the current border in the middle that's casting the shadow. And while I was there, I did a video of this area too, and while I was doing the video, somebody crossed over the border, and I managed to grab this in real time. And so it's like, I don't know exactly what was going through this person's mind. When I contacted, or Time Magazine contacted the Border Patrol, they denied that there was a crossing at this point until Time Magazine showed them the picture eventually, and then they admitted it.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. All right. Started. My project is called Out of Bounds. A little background on this. I started this project actually at an interesting point in my life. I was having a child, and I found out it was going to be a boy, and I was thinking a lot about my experiences with incarceration and how that had affected my life. And then I just happened to I got an assignment to spend a day with these kids that were in a camp that was similar to a camp that I had spent 6 months in. And I didn't expect this, but it affected me in ways I just couldn't have imagined, and I got really close to these guys. like Tapia here, who's calling his girlfriend back in Los Angeles. And, you know, all these guys are doing time from about the time they're 14 on average, 14 to 15, with an average of, you know, lots of them get life sentences, and then maybe get a chance to get out after 7 or 8 years if they really keep their heads down. So these guys in this camp are trying to keep their heads down, and it's basically the opportunity that they're given is to kind of reform through labor, is what they call it. So it's essentially a labor camp. It's the last juvenile camp of that sort in the state of California. So these guys are actually trained as wildland firefighters, which they do about a quarter of the year, and then the other 3 quarters they do traditional road work, like chain gang style work. A lot of these guys do, you know, they're not allowed any items from home unless they have some religious affiliation to them, because religion is promoted by the staff because it's been shown to kind of keep guys under control and decrease incidents of violence. But one of the things about that I was really looking for when I was here spending time was these moments that of kind of brotherhood that these guys have, which is something that you don't expect in a prison environment. You know, these guys, when they're on the inside, they kind of bond together and create these ties that they maybe have never really experienced even on the outside, and they have to in order to kind of stay strong while they're there. Tikum and his, you know, his gang tattoos. So you know, one of the almost every single person that you see that is in these pictures was charged with a gang-enhanced charge. What that means is that it could be something that, you know, an average teenager from one neighborhood commits a certain type of crime, but it's not considered a gang neighborhood, and they get probation, whereas if you do it in a gang neighborhood, you get a 7-year sentence for the same crime. That's, you know, and then the thing is that what defines a gang neighborhood is generally drawn up based on racial lines. So these guys kind of stay fit all day because they're out working so hard. Sorry. This was you know, to me this was like, it was one of my personal favorite photos, just because, you know, these guys have never been in nature before until it was kind of used to incarcerate them. The prison doesn't have any walls or anything like that, and a lot of times it's the first time that they've seen wild animals, and, you know, these guys have all of these, some of them have murder charges, kidnapping charges, all types of things that make people recoil and label them, but really, you know, they're kids. And, you know, this guy was amazed by this little frog, and he took it and released it back into the wild. And this is heading out to work for the day. So this is what actually, you know, they branded inmate firefighting, they branded the labor camps and the chain gangs firefighter camps in California, but really they mostly do road work, and that's what these guys are doing here. This is a guy that became a good friend of mine that I continued working with upon his release. This was his last day in prison here, so he was pretty happy to be brushing his teeth in that mirror for the last time. Tapia, who had just gotten there, and he kind of just thought, you know, he had that attitude of this is all bullshit, and felt that it was an extension of the slavery system, and you know, he wanted nothing to do with that American flag. In between visits, there actually was a large riot. These guys ended up getting in a big altercation, and out of the 90 inmates, by the way, 4 of whom were Caucasian and all the rest are Mexican and black, gives you an idea of who we lock up in this country. But these were the only guys that were left that didn't get rolled out to maximum security. I also followed the gang unit because I wanted to see kind of what is the policing tactics that lead to these guys getting locked up at such a high rate, you know, compared to other places. And where they generally come from is the breadbasket of California and much of America is Central Valley. This is an irrigation ditch running through the barrio. Most of their parents are the people that are farming our food, and then there aren't any opportunities in the cities for the next generation, and these kids don't want to work in the fields, but you end up living in a city that doesn't really have anything else for you. And, you know, this affects these guys and girls from the time that they're babies. They see their parents criminalized from a very early age. One of the main ways that they kind of hunt people down is through social media. This was a warrant search that was all based on, you know, the cops they have fake personalities that they create on Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, and they follow guys that they're hunting down. And so this was off of a Snapchat search that they saw a gun, and so we went to the house. This was right when Kane got released, and his friends came to visit him, and we went straight to the cemetery to see some of Kane's friends that hadn't made it, and one of his buddies busted out his new Scarface tattoo, which I just thought was a bit ironic. This was Zarik who caught a round in a case of mistaken identity, and the really sad thing about Zarik was that because he is black and from a gang neighborhood, it was immediately reported that it was due to his activities in the area, and the kid was actually an altar boy, a pillar of the community, and we as media have to do better than that. We can't just take police reports and repeat them like they're fact without looking into them. And I was the only journalist that spent time with his family. Nobody cared, and they let me in because just because I asked, really. And this was, they wanted me to show a celebration of Zarik's life as a good person, and so I just like to end here with, it was a happy event at his memorial. So that's it.
Thank you.
It's so hard to speak after those two. Thank you. So to give a bit of context first, my background is actually in youth development. So prior to becoming a photographer, I wanted to be a youth worker in some kind of context. And now that I'm photographing for most of my life, I really like to approach stories that are about adolescence and youth culture, and most recently, the intersection of national identity and coming of age. And 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, I went to school at ICP, and I began a project there that was actually what I'm doing right now with Catchlight currently. And for this project, I went to Russia, which requires a very large backstory I don't have time to get into. But I began to photograph in Russia different kids who were attending political camps, patriotic camps, and military schools. And I was photographing this during the US election year, which was a really crazy year, as we all know. But also, it was a year when Russia was all over the headlines. And not only that, we had a lot of nationalistic and xenophobic rhetoric that was marking our dialogue, not only internally, but in the way in which we discussed global politics. So, as a recent student, and a very naive student, I really wanted to publish a photo essay that would cause some kind of internal dialogue. I was really hoping to create a story that would cause, critical thinking, not only about Russia, but about the United States as well. And I published this photo essay, and really the opposite reaction happened. The response from not only the public, but also the media was really centered on thinking, look at Russians, they're so nationalistic, this is so crazy. And for me, that was incredibly frustrating. This opened a dialogue in my own mind. I began to think, why are we as Americans always patriotic, but other countries and individuals are nationalistic? And this kind of hypocrisy and frustration led me to propose this project with Catchlight. So I proposed to do a project based on similar themes in the US. I went to around 15 different states last year, and I decided to photograph camps and clubs that were teaching this idea of patriotic education. But I also just really simply wanted to talk to young people and to see how they were responding to the political situation that's happening in our own country. And what I found is that the notion of nationhood for so many of these groups and kids, it ranges so diversely across the country. And there's not one simple definition for what it means. In fact, most of them contradict each other. So in the beginning, I was looking for, one narrative thread to follow, but instead what I found was so many counter-narratives and stories that really didn't make sense together. And to give you a few examples, I'm going to go through some of the camps that I went through really briefly. This camp here is called Utah Patriot Camp. It's in Utah, as you can guess. And it's for kids who are in elementary school. And this camp, it's simply education, there's no military. They teach about the Constitution and history. But this camp has a lot of very strong theories about American exceptionalism, manifest destiny, and things like these. So for example, going off what Tomas said, actually, this camp teaches that God blessed the founding fathers to win the Native Americans in battle, and that it was his will for them to succeed and to conquer the US. So they teach theories like these that are very intense, that really combine ideas of God and history together. I don't have time for all of these, so I'm gonna go kind of quickly. This program here is actually a combination of Boy Scouts and Homeland Security, which I did not know existed prior, but it's based on the border of Mexico and the US, and I went to Texas and New Mexico to photograph this. And they teach primarily Latino and Mexican students who are around 14, 15 years old how to train in the Border Patrol. And I found this camp in particular very interesting because they use a very strong rhetoric of, us versus them. So for example, you're a good immigrant, they're the bad ones. You're a good citizen, they're the bad ones. It was very divisive and kind of had this superhero versus villain mentality that really entices young people. Programs like these, this is in Pennsylvania, I didn't focus too strongly on these groups because I wanted to avoid, really hateful groups or extreme groups. This was after Charlottesville, and I thought if I focused too intensely on these kinds of programs, it would take away attention from all the other bullshit that's happening across the states too. So anyways, it's still part of the fabric of what's happening with youth in the States. And I actually I found this conversation very compelling with this family. The father of this boy, he considers himself to be a true American patriot because he considers himself loyal to his ideology, which is of course to his race, and a very hateful and intense kind of ideology. But as you can see already, the definitions of what it means to be patriotic are very contradicting. So whose definition are we teaching? This last program that I went to is in Wisconsin, and I also found this program very shocking. They taught students how to respond to active shooters. So a lot of these kids, in this photograph, they're actually 12 years old, they're very young, but they learn how to respond to shooters in their schools to prepare for high school shootings. And their definition of what it means to be patriotic is basically that you don't sit back and protest, but instead you're prepared to fight back and to be armed yourself. So as I said, in the beginning when I started this project, I was really looking for one simple definition of what it meant to either be nationalistic or patriotic. But in the end, I found so many narratives that really contradicted one another. And I think this is why I'm drawn to stories about youth and youth culture. I really like the way that teenagers muddy our way of thinking. I mean, so often, not only as photographers and those working for the media, but as just people who digest it, we're used to a binary that is very black and white. It's very us versus them, left versus right. And our stories have very simple conclusions. But when you work with young people, it automatically destroys that. I mean, the kids in these pictures, they're not gonna be who they are in 10 years from now. They're in a very fluid state of being, and their identities aren't formed yet by any means. So it's impossible to really judge them completely. I mean, it's all in a state of non-being. So I think that's why I'm really drawn to stories about adolescence in general. And with this project, I was really hoping to ask a lot of questions. For example, I was really interested to know, where are we at with empathy? And is our society fracturing? How does social media impact all of this? And I think most importantly, how are young people responding to the politics happening around them? And as always, I spoke way too fast. I'm out of time, so okay, thank you very much. That's it.
So we have some time for some questions, and I'll just say, these obviously three very different, very compelling stories that we could squirrel away and go down deep into any one of these. Each of the fellows will be back at the container later, and invite you back there to really dig in deep on those. But I think for the purposes of this group, it's really a nice time to take a big step back and see really what it is that we're trying to do here. So one of our key sort of components or visions of Catchlight is to widen the lens, to understand how we can have you experienced any one of these programs and presentations and walk away going, wow, I never thought about that before? And this comes from this sense that I mentioned earlier, which is sort of a very growing sense that we all see and all recognize of reductive presentation of ideas, stereotypes, sort of more linear and narrow thinking. So we really want and encourage and create opportunity for our fellows to go really wide and present each one of these issues with the complexity with which they're due. So I'm going to ask each one of these guys to talk a little bit about how that lens, widening the lens, informed the way they thought about their project.
I guess in my case it was about history, and it is kind of amazing how much coverage that the US-Mexican border got in 2016 in the run-up to the elections without the country being informed. How was this line drawn where it is on the map today? Like, when I ask people, when I go out and ask them, how did the United States get the West? And most people say, they must have bought it or something like that. And it's just not taught in schools because it's kind of embarrassing. It doesn't fit with the narrative that America tells itself and tells its school children, basically. This was pre-US Civil War. The United States was deadlocked between abolitionist states and slave states. And if you could add a little more slave territory, that would flip the balance. In the meantime, Mexico was incredibly progressive. They just had their revolution against Spain in 1821. They abolished slavery in 1824, and they opened up immigration. And so people moved into Texas and brought their slaves with them, and then the Mexican authorities banned slaves, and Texas slave owners revolted. And so the starting domino that tilted Mexican land being seized by the United States is the same thing that started the Civil War. It is wanting to expand slave territory. And if you start thinking back on what you were taught in school, right? Henry David Thoreau, he wrote On Civil Disobedience. What was he being civil disobedient about? He refused to pay taxes for the Mexican-American War because he said it was an unjust war to expand slave territory. Now, the year that we're voting for a president whose main campaign promise is talking about this border, your average American doesn't know why the border is there in the first place. And instead, the media is talking about, will the wall be 30 feet high or 20 feet high, or should it not be a wall at all? Should it be a fence? And things like this. So this was a voyage of discovery for me, but it was also something that just sort of unraveled some beliefs that I thought were pretty solid in growing up. And the more I learned, the more it unraveled them, and I sort of just had to embrace that complexity and try to come up with a new, more nuanced understanding of this country's history.
For me, I guess widening the lens on the story meant really kind of stepping back and asking, almost, where was scarier for the guys I was photographing? And I was surprised to find out a lot of the times the scariest thing for them was actually going home. And that was just a crazy thought to me. I had guys that I photographed that, purposely violated in order to stay in prison because they didn't have anywhere to go. And I think that, we see images of like scary inmates, and it's really easy to dehumanize them, and we see their tattoos, and it's really easy to be like, oh, well, he's a gangster, and not think about why it is that someone does something like that. And usually it's because of survival. So really, like, being able to step back and find intimate moments with these guys and show them, show the softer moments was really important. But then also, the learning experience for me was then to spend time in some of these neighborhoods and see the policing, which, a lot of the aggression and violence I saw was actually on the outside world, targeting these guys. And it's not to say that they don't, they already live in a world full of violence in many ways, but it's, a lot of there's military tactics being employed in their neighborhoods as well. So, to be able to look at it from several feet back, and maybe I just hope that people ask that question of like, why, how messed up is our world that we're giving people this the only safety that we're providing for these guys is that they find in their whole life is when they get locked up. Like, what about when they're on the outside? What about opportunities that they should be having on the outside? Nobody, seems to be focusing on that. And so, I don't know the answer to all of these questions, but, to widen the lens, I'm hoping that people at least start asking those questions a little bit.
Terrific, thank you. Sarah?
I think going off what Brian said too, for me it was just an opportunity to be able to work on a project that didn't require having a simple answers to. I think oftentimes, especially in media, but in photography stories, we're generally just giving a black and white answer, and we're telling our audience, here's what to think, here's what to believe, and the formula is right here for you. And I think with Catchlight, we had the chance to really work backwards, to kind of work against that trend, and to not be afraid to create stories or to create images that they don't give simple answers or stories. Maybe they're the opposite. Maybe they ask us a lot of questions or cause us to leave a little bit more confused. For me as a photographer, I think that's very compelling. Like, I hope my images make people question things more. I hope it makes them struggle. And that came through my own struggling. This last year was very hard for me. I mean, I struggled a lot with my project and with the story and with the images themselves. It wasn't an easy thing, and I felt stuck a lot of the time. But I think widening the lens for me meant, really having the time and capacity to be able to do that. Having the time to struggle with your work was the most beneficial thing that we can have as photographers. But again, going back to the last thing I said, I think, being able to work with youth who are so complicated, the issues that they're dealing with, nationalism or very harsh rhetoric, or these issues that are coming up in the news, school shootings, things that are affecting young people, they're very troubling subjects and themes, and they leave a very bad taste in my mouth all the time. But on the other hand, you have youth who are just, innocent. They're 13, 14 years old. They're falling in love at summer camp. They're coming of age. They're just stupid boys and girls who know nothing about these issues that we're talking about. And I think that kind of tension and that kind of relationship, having those two things together, extreme innocence with extreme non-innocence, creates a story that's, for me, very, very interesting. It doesn't allow room to have black and white answers. So that's a very roundabout answer, but...
No, it's good. It's good. One other question I want to ask is, I'm really, one of our driving cultural methodologies is around collaboration. And I love the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we as an organization are very much, as I mentioned earlier, we rely heavily on partnerships to help move our fellowship concepts forward. We've intentionally partnered each one of these guys with media partnerships, and then they themselves have actually developed a nice collaboration amongst themselves, mainly because they're all really nice people, which is another criteria for us. We really like to work with really nice people. But I would just wonder if you guys will each comment on collaboration, either internally or externally, whatever it means to you. What has worked for you this year?
I guess in my case, I was partnered with the Pulitzer Center, and they're an organization that I'd worked with in the past, and they'd pushed me into doing something previously that I hadn't done before, and that was bringing me into high school classrooms to talk about my work. And I found that it was super fulfilling in a way, because first of all, when you publish through traditional media sources, you don't get the same kind of feedback, right? If you're publishing in print, you get almost zero feedback. And if you're publishing online, you get like crazy people posting emoticons or spam or all kinds of things like that. It's not that often you get something really enriching. But high school students, a lot of the material that they're given in school is kind of musty, coming out of old textbooks. So if somebody walks into their classroom and is like, hey, I've been to North Korea, this is what it's like, or here's a story that you've never heard about the history of your own people, they're super receptive to it. High school people have like this ingrained feeling of injustice. They know what's right and wrong, basically, and they're not scared. They're like, what? That's messed up, basically. And so, like, they have a thirst for this information. They're not fully formed in ideas. And you can see, like, the feedback in real time. You can see if high school students are responding, if they're getting worked up. And so I started doing these class visits through the Pulitzer Center. And it really informed when I was writing my grant proposal for the Catchlight grant was what I'd started to learn about the US-Mexican border. I was like, why didn't I learn this in school? Like, everybody that lives in the West, at the very least, should know about this. Anybody that's voting on the border as an issue should know this context. Any Hispanic American should not feel excluded and to be foreign from the fabric of America. It's more foundational than anything. So that was something that I wanted to share in high schools, and so through the Pulitzer Center and that collaboration with Catchlight, I've been continuing. I'm going on Monday. I'm doing 2 public school visits here in New York, and then Tuesday and Wednesday I'll be heading to Delaware. So like the educational outreach thing is something that they have established. They have a team, and that's really worked out for me in terms of collaboration and for personal inspiration too.
Great, thank you. Brian?
So one of the, most difficult things about doing this type of work is it can often be how isolating it really gets. I've worked on projects alone in the past and gone down the rabbit hole because it's just, you end up completely consumed by the work and not even being healthy at that point. And that was one of the main problems I had with earlier projects I did, which almost made it so that I didn't want to take pictures anymore because it felt like an unhealthy thing all of a sudden. To be able to do a story surrounded by friends and colleagues and a support network was like super powerful. And it's something that turned photography into something positive for me again. That's, to me, the strongest network has been the network that's here on the stage with me right now. I also got to work with people that, could speak the language that I don't speak. I do better when I'm in jail, honestly. I'm more comfortable like with those guys than I am speaking to a PR flack for the prisons, you know what I mean? So to have access to, the Marshall Project, who could help me with writing, rewording letters that I was writing and, so that maybe they would get some traction to get me access was super key. And then even after that going forward, like Catchlight has been there all along still, even though I'm done, and I'm trying to have direct impact by teaching some of these guys as they get out, teaching them photography, and the Pulitzer Center has been there to help out with that. And I mean, these are all opportunities that I wouldn't have had any other way, and really they're there just because there's community that's there that, is lifting this up and making it possible.
Perfect. Thank you. Sarah?
I was partnered with the Center for Investigative Reporting, and at the beginning of this whole process, I was incredibly nervous because I think there is no personality as opposite of mine as an investigative reporter. So I was thinking, how is this going to work? Are we going to be able to collaborate, and what's going to happen? But I mean, yeah, as Brian said, we're always working alone, and we're used to being this, lone wolf, semi-narcissistic, isolated personality, doing everything on our own terms. And for me, having someone there who is a lot more academically sane than me and who could research things I could never imagine to do was so helpful. A lot of the loopholes I was struggling with, I was working with a writer through this media organization that was really pushing me and encouraging me to try different avenues. It was nothing but a positive experience. And, I'm a very new photographer still. I graduated 2 years ago from school, so I can use all the help I can get. But it was a fantastic experience. And, I really look up to these 2 guys right here, and they've been an immense source of help for me as well. So, yeah, it's been great. And, going forward, I can't imagine trying to embark on this kind of project alone. I think it really changed my perspective moving forward as a photographer, and to always be open to those those sources of collaboration, not only for critique and for push, but also for some validation and encouragement. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. We have a few minutes for questions. So first of all, are there students here who have some questions? Yes, you're right here. And you have to just speak out. Oh, here comes a microphone. If you will, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Bing. I'm a student at ICP, and one of the common themes I saw in all of your work was sort of this militarization, where there's the militarization of the border, or of policing, or of like society and culture. And my question was sort of, when you're dealing with these sort of powerful entities and agencies, whether that's the prison system in California or Border Patrol, how do you maintain that sort of access, especially when a lot of things you're portraying, or even these like nationalistic youth camps may not be all that flattering to the subjects?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Who wants to take
I mean, one of the problems that I mean, it's a conflict I have sometimes, pretty often. I'm spending time sometimes with police, and you're embedded, and you start liking some of these guys, and at the same time, I'm like, maybe you're not gonna like what I publish, but at the same time, I mean, you know, I'm also surprised because a lot of the guys I work with, they know how messed up the system is, and a lot of the times my own fears are just my own fears. I mean, they're smart guys. They know how jacked up the whole, you know, their whole incentive system of criminalizing people is, and they realize that. And you know, I think that at the end of the day, the test is, can I bring that work to them and show it to them? And you know, I'm confident that I can, and that they're intelligent people, and that they can look at it with a critical eye themselves. They're not going to like everything, but they also are going to, you know, they have a good understanding of things themselves as well. And hopefully they learn a little bit too, maybe.
That's great. Any other comments? Another question from a student. Yes, and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm a senior at NYU. My question is mostly directed for Tomas, I guess. I was really struck by the way that you use the wet plate process and then like the drone footage or the drone photos for the border project. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship and like the feedback between like your methods, your photographic methods, and your final projects when you work with anything, and how you learn.
So, I mean, I think like most photographers, kind of the trajectory that I followed was first being attracted to photography and the masters of photography because some pictures that I saw of them really moved me. And then as an early photographer, trying to sort of like mimic that, and I felt like I'd gotten somewhere when I could take pictures like them. And then like feeling comfortable with a certain way of taking pictures for a long time. And I first started working with drones in 2013 when they were first coming out. And it was for a story or a project that I proposed about surveillance and drone warfare. And so I wanted my pictures to have the aesthetic that surveillance and war like military photographs do. And so rather than using sort of the aesthetic that I was comfortable with or an aesthetic that a master photographer that I admired, I decided to choose the aesthetic to amplify the story. And since then, I've kept doing that. And so that's why I chose wet plate for this. There's all kinds of visual codes that come with historical photographs. Why is it when you look at an old photograph, people are incredibly formal, they're incredibly stiff? Why is it when I look at the media today, often when you see the subject of the border covered, you see Hispanic people always portrayed like being arrested, jumping over a fence, swimming through a river. But when we look at the old pioneers of the West, they're always like formal and dignified, right? So I was like, the codes that Hispanic people should have had visually, they don't have for this reason. So how can I give that to them, and how can I find a process that amplifies the story? So now when I look at a project, I don't choose, this is the camera system I'm most comfortable with. I look at, this is the camera system that will take my project further.
Terrific. So I hate to say this, but we have time for one more question. So back here in the back.
My name is Salem Krieger. Curious, when you were at the border, how did you get permission to use drones? Because it's so prohibitive here in New York to even fly in this area.
I was flying from the Mexican side. The rules are different there.
When they saw the drone coming over, nobody noticed anything, or
What's that? Sorry?
drones were never noticed, nobody...
There are rules, but it's not the same rules in the United States. You're not allowed to fly over federal buildings or near airports. Other than that, the big worry is not police. It's like, where are the cartels active? So it's more like security concerns rather than regulation concerns, because there are certain border areas that drug cartels are active, and if they saw unusual activity, that could be a security threat for you. So that was a bigger concern than government regulation.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm actually told we have a few more minutes, so one more question. Yes, right here.
I wanted to know how you, in what kind of platforms, either digital or printing, you've presented your work, and if you have had some reactions to your work where people have had their opinions on the subject area changed.
And just to follow up on that too, will you guys just mention, Brian, you have some upcoming publications of your work just to get everybody cued to keep an eye out for that. So you want to go first?
On the publication
On
part?
her question, or both.
My work has been, I'm publishing it coming up. I'm kind of not allowed to say where, unfortunately, sorry. But yeah, I know it's, I've been kind of waiting to publish my work in a traditional media space. And then after that, and then the non-traditional side for me, because I think it's important, I'm kind of looking at publishing in a different way, is also working with some of the guys themselves and getting their work published, teaching them photography, and they have lots of stories to tell. So I'm trying to do both of those things.
Yeah, Brian is running workshops for former incarcerated individuals.
Have opinions been changed through your work?
Absolutely. My body of work hasn't published yet, so I don't know I can't be honest about what impact that's going to have, but absolutely with my students, talk about a change. They just coming to a workshop and being told that they're doing something good, and these guys are so talented and smart, but maybe they've just never been told that. Just their opinions of themselves. I've watched that change. That's been the most powerful, really, part of this, actually, for me, has just been the effect on some of the guys directly. So that's the opinions I've noticed change.
Sarah?
I shared Brian's work with my family over a dinner, and my parents were both getting a little bit emotional. And they're very conservative and view this entire situation completely opposite as you. And we looked at your pictures and talked about the camps for the fire training and all that, and they were completely speechless. And if you can change my parents' opinions, you can change anyone's opinions. But with my own work, I think the most interesting aspect has been speaking to high schoolers, having them reflect on these issues that directly affect them, and hearing their comments have been, incredibly interesting. It's less about fear and more about empathy. And in the beginning, I was worried they would be like, "Wow, those crazy people in the country doing things," and having more stereotypical responses. But I think young people are incredibly open and curious and interested to talk about these issues. So I've seen a very positive response, and I've seen less, divisive reactions as I have with prior work than I have had with this work. And most of the ways I've been showing this work has been online. I think that's actually the less ideal way to show work currently. I think, being in person, being able to talk about it with people face to face is the best.
Tomas?
The traditional border stuff, Lines and Lineage, was in Harper's Magazine in print, so I don't get feedback from there, but they gave it a lot of space, and I feel like, curious, interesting people read it, so it's good to put it out there. The drone border work was on time.com. And then I've been giving a lot of talks, and so that's where I can get a little bit of direct feedback. There was one particular talk that I gave in the Bay Area in Palo Alto, California, and one person sort of spoke at the end, and she was basically in tears. She was young. She said, "Why hadn't they taught me this in high school?" And so I felt kind of when I'd written the grant proposal, I was hoping to affect somebody like her. So I have one voice like that, which is encouraging. I don't know, the rest of it, I'll just have to see. Or the thing is, I take a leap of faith anyway, that I know that these stories are important, and so I don't need to always see a direct impact from it. I know what countries look like where information is controlled and not true. Go to North Korea, take all the storytelling away, have the narratives decided by one sole state entity. It's a disastrous situation. So I know these stories, and telling honest and authentic stories is important. It will have an impact whether I see it or not.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up by saying that we're actually doing a lot of work this year at Catchlight to drill down specifically into social impact, which is this very unwieldy thing, but it's the subject of a lot of good work, and so stay tuned this time next year. Please join us over at the Container. These guys will all be there. You can ask more questions, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here.